The uncle smiled a little. "It comes more from experience than from study," he replied. But in spite of the smile, a look of sadness came over his face. Out of the dim past before his eyes rose the suffering face of a man who used to sit wrapped up in a chair just like this, and was so crippled that he could hardly use a limb. It was his captain, whom he had found lying on the ground after a fierce battle in Sicily, and had carried off the field, and from that time the captain would allow no other nurse around him, and would never let him out of his sight until his great sufferings came to an end. The uncle saw his sick friend before him again. His only thought now was that it would be his duty to care for sick Clara, and show her all those comforting attentions he understood so well. The sky spread deep blue and cloudless above the hut and the fir trees, and high above the lofty cliffs, which towered up so grey and sparkling. Clara could not look round enough. She was perfectly charmed with all that she saw. "Oh, Heidi, if I could only go round with you about the hut and under the fir tree," she exclaimed longingly. "If I could go with you to look at all the things I've heard so much about and haven't as yet seen." Then Heidi made a great effort and succeeded in rolling the chair smoothly over the dry, grassy ground under the fir trees. Here she paused. Clara had never seen anything in her life like the tall old fir trees whose long, wide-spreading branches grew down to the ground and became larger and thicker there. The grandmamma who had followed the children also stood still in great wonder. She could not tell which was the more beautiful, the full roaring tops of the ancient trees high up in the blue sky, or the straight, strong trunks, which with their mighty branches could tell so many, many years that they had been standing there and looking down into the valley where men came and went, and everything else was constantly changing, while they always remained the same. Meanwhile, Heidi pushed the wheelchair in front of the goat shed and opened the little door wide so that Clara could see everything inside. There was really not much to see now, for the goats were not at home. Clara called back quite regretfully, "Oh, grandmamma, if I could just wait for Schwanley and Barley and all the other goats and Peter, I can never see them all if we always have to go away as early as you said. It is such a shame." "Dear child, we will enjoy all the beautiful things that are here, and not think about those things that are wanting," was the grandmamma's advice as she followed the chair which Heidi was now pushing back. "Oh, the flowers!" exclaimed Clara. "Whole bushes of fine red flowers and all the nodding bluebells. Oh, if I could only go and get some." Heidi immediately ran and brought back to her a great bunch of them. "But this is nothing, Clara," she said, laying the flowers in her lap. "If you could come up to the pasture with us once, then you would see something. In one place there are so many, many bushes of red centauries, and ever so many more bluebells than are here, and oh, so many thousands of bright yellow wildflowers that it looks as if the ground were shining with pure gold. They're wild roses. And then there are some with large leaves, which my grandfather says are called Heliopsis. And besides the brown ones, with little round heads which smell so good, and is so beautiful. If once you sit down there, you can never get up again. It's so lovely." Heidi's eyes sparkled with longing to see what she was describing, and Clara was so excited by it that out of her gentle blue eyes there shone a complete reflection of Heidi's fiery enthusiasm. "Oh, grandmamma, can I go up there? Do you think I can go so high?" she asked eagerly. "Oh, if I could only go, Heidi, and climb around everywhere on the mountain with you." "I will push you," said Heidi soothingly, and to show how easily it went, she took a turn around the corner where that the chair almost ran away from her down the mountain. But her grandfather was standing near and stopped its course just in time. During their visit to the fir trees, the grandfather had not been idle. The table and necessary chairs were standing by the bench in front of the hut, and everything was ready. The good dinner was still steaming in the kettle, and roasting on the big fork over the fire inside the hut. It was not long before the grandfather had everything on the table, and the whole company sat down gladly to the meal. Their grandmamma was perfectly enchanted with this dining room, from which one could see far, far down into the valley, and above all, the mountains into the blue sky. A cool, mild breeze gently fanned the faces of the guests and rustled as pleasantly in the fir trees as if it had been music especially ordered for the feast. Nothing like this has ever happened to me. It is really glorious, exclaimed the grandmamma again and again. But what do I see? She added in greatest surprise. I believe you are taking a second piece of toasted cheese, Clarkin. Sure enough, a second golden shining piece of cheese lay on Clara's slice of bread. Oh, it tasted so good, grandmamma. Better than everything on the table at Ragat's, asserted Clara, taking the appetizing food with great relish. Eat away, said the uncle, well pleased. It is our mountain air which succeeds when the cooks fail. So the happy meal went on, and the grandmamma and the uncle took a great liking to each other, and their conversation became more and more lively. They agreed in all their opinions about men and things and the progress of the world as well as if they had been friends for years. Thus the time passed until the grandmamma, suddenly looking toward the west, said, We must soon get ready, Clark, and the sun is already going down. The people will be back with the horse and the chair. Immediately an expression of sadness came over Clara's happy face, and she begged, Oh, grandmamma, just one more hour or two. We haven't seen the hut yet, or Heidi's bed, and all their other arrangements. Oh, if the day were only 10 hours longer. That is not possible, said the grandmamma. But she too wanted to see the hut, so they rose at once from the table, and the uncle directed the chair with steady hand to the door. But here it could go no further. The chair was much too wide to go through the opening. The uncle did not stop long to consider. He lifted Clara out and carried her in his strong arms into the hut. The grandmamma went back and forth looking carefully at all the furnishings, and was greatly amused at the household inventions that were so prettily arranged and well ordered. That is surely your bed up above there, Heidi, is it not? She then asked, and straightway, without any timidity, she climbed the little ladder leading to the hayloft. Oh, how sweet it smells! It must be a healthful sleeping room, and the grandmamma went to the window and peeped through. The grandfather followed with Clara in his arms, and Heidi came on behind. They then all stood around Heidi's beautifully made hay bed, and grandmamma looked at it quite critically every now and then, drawing in little deep breaths of the spicy fragrance of the new hay. Oh, Heidi, what a jolly place you have here! From your bed you can see straight out into the sky, and you have such a lovely odor around you, and you can hear the fir trees roar outside. Oh, I have never seen such a jolly, pleasant sleeping room before. And the uncle then looked over at the grandmamma. I have an idea, he said. If the grandmamma could have enough confidence in me to let me try out my plan, I think if we could keep the daughter up here a little while, she would gain new strength. You have brought shawls and wraps out of which we could arrange an entirely separate soft bed, and the grandmamma need have no anxiety about the care of the little daughter. That I will undertake myself. Clara and Heidi both shouted with joy like two escaped birds, and the grandmamma's face lighted up with sunshine. My dear uncle, you are a wonderful man, she exclaimed. How did you know what I was just thinking about? I was saying to myself, wouldn't a stay up here give the child special strength? But the nursing, the care, the inconvenience to the host. And here you speak of it as if it would be nothing at all. I must thank you, my dear uncle. I must thank you with my whole heart. And the grandmamma shook the uncle's hand again and again, and the uncle also shook hers with great delight. The uncle immediately began to carry out his plan. He carried Clara back to her chair in front of the hut. Heidi followed, not knowing how high she wanted to jump in her delight. Then he piled up all the shawls and fur robes in his arms and said, smiling with satisfaction, "It is a good thing that Grandmamma brought enough things for a winter's campaign. We can use them." "My dear uncle," she replied, approaching briskly, "foresight is an excellent virtue and protection from many an evil. If one escapes a storm and wind and violent rains in traveling over your mountains, one may be thankful. And so we are. And my wraps may be useful yet. About that we are agreed." During this little conversation, the two climbed up to the hayloft and began to spread the shawls one after another over the bed. There were so many that the bed finally looked like a little fortress. "Now let a single wisp of hay stick through, if it can," said the grandmamma, and she pressed with her hands on all sides, but the soft wall was so thick that nothing really could stick through. Then she climbed down the ladder, quite satisfied, and went out to the children, who were sitting close together with beaming faces, and planning what they would do from morning till night as long as Clara stayed on the mountain. But how long would that be? That was now the great question, which was at once laid before the grandmamma. She said the grandfather knew best about that. They must ask him. As he happened along just then, the question was put to him, and he said he thought that in about 4 weeks it would be safe to judge whether the mountain air would do its duty by the little daughter or not. Then the children shouted aloud, for the prospect of being together so long surpassed everything they had expected. The porters with the chair and the guide with the horse were now seen coming up the mountain. The first were allowed to return empty and go back again immediately. When the grandmamma was preparing to mount the horse, Clara exclaimed cheerfully, "Oh, grandmamma, we won't say farewell if you're going away, for you will come back every little while to visit us on the mountain to see what we are doing, and that will be so delightful, won't it, Heidi?" Heidi, who had had one pleasure after another that day, could only express her assent by jumping high with delight. The grandmamma mounted the steady beast, and the uncle took the bridle and led the horse safely down the steep mountain. Although the grandmamma tried not to have him go so far, it was of no use. The uncle explained that he was anxious to accompany her as far as Deerfleet, for the mountain was steep, and the ride not free from danger. The grandmamma thought that now she was by herself she would not stay in Deerfleet, where it was lonely. She would rather return to Ragats and take the journey up the mountain occasionally from there. Before the uncle returned, Peter came along with his goats, and when they noticed Heidi, they all rushed toward her, and in a moment Clara in her chair, together with Heidi, was in the midst of the flock. And some one goat was always crowding and pushing to see over another, and each was immediately called and presented by Heidi to Clara. So it happened that in a very short time Clara had made the long-wished-for acquaintance with Sneehaefely and Jolly Disselfink and Grandfather's clean goats and all the rest, up to the Big Turk. But meanwhile Peter stood aside and threw occasional threatening glances at happy Clara. When the children both called out pleasantly to him, "Good night, Peter," he made no reply, but raised his rod angrily in the air as if he would like to beat them to pieces, and then he ran away with his followers after him. Now came an end to all the lovely things Clara had seen that day on the mountain. When she lay on her great soft bed in the hayloft, to which Heidi had also climbed, she looked through the round open window out at the twinkling stars, and, completely charmed, exclaimed, "Oh, Heidi, see, it is just as if we were riding in the sky in a high carriage." "Yes, and do you know why the stars are so full of joy and wink at us so with their eyes?" asked Heidi. "No, I don't." "What do you think about it?" asked Clara. "Because they see up in heaven how well the dear Lord directs everything for people, so they need have no worry and can be safe, because everything will happen for the best. That delights them so. See how they wink? That we may be happy too. But do you know, Clara, we must not forget our prayers. We must ask the dear Lord to think of us, when He's directing everything so well, that we may always be safe and never be afraid of anything." So the children sat up in bed and said their evening prayers. Then Heidi lay her head on her round arm and was asleep in a moment. But Clara stayed awake for a long time, for she had never seen anything so wonderful in her life as this sleeping room in the starlight. Moreover, she had hardly ever seen the stars, for she never went outside the house at night. And indoors the thick curtains were drawn long before the stars came out. Now, whenever she closed her eyes, she had to open them again once more to see if the two big, bright stars were still shining in and winking as remarkably as Heidi had said. And it was always so. And Clara could not look enough at their twinkling and sparkling until at last her eyes closed of themselves, and in her dreams she still saw the two big shining stars. Well, the sun was just coming up behind the mountains and casting its golden beams over the hut and down across the valley. The uncle had been silently and attentively watching, as he did every morning, how all round on the heights and in the valley the light mists were lifting, and the landscape appeared out of the twilight shadows and awoke to the new day. Brighter and brighter grew the morning clouds, until the sun came out in all its glory, and the rocks and woods and hilltops were bathed in golden light. Then the uncle went back into his hut and climbed softly up the little ladder. Clara had just awakened, and was gazing in the greatest amazement at the bright sunbeams which came in through the round window and glanced and danced on her bed. She did not know what she was looking at or where she was. Then she looked at Heidi sleeping beside her, and the grandfather's friendly voice sounded, asking, "Did you sleep well? Are you tired?" Clara assured him that she was not tired, and that after she had once fallen asleep, she did not wake up again all night. This pleased the grandfather, and he immediately set to work and cared for Clara as well and understandingly as if it had always been his profession to take care of sick children and make them comfortable. By this time, Heidi had opened her eyes and was surprised to see her grandfather had already finished Clara's toilet and was carrying her away in his arms. She felt that she must be with them. She dressed as quickly as lightning, and then went down the ladder and was out of the door, and stood looking in the greatest surprise at what her grandfather had been doing further. The evening before, when the children had gone to bed in the loft, he had planned how to bring the wide rolling chair under cover. The door of the hut had been much too small to allow it to enter. Then the thought had come to him. Behind the shop he loosened two large boards, and thus formed a wide opening. The chair was pushed in, and then the planks were put back in their places, though they were not fastened. Heidi came along just as her grandfather was putting Clara in her chair, for he had taken away the boards and was coming out of the shop with her into the morning sunshine. He left the chair standing in a safe place and went to the goat shed. Heidi ran to Clara's side. The cool morning breeze blew around the children's faces, and the spicy fragrance from the fir trees came down with every new gust of wind. Clara drew in deep breaths and leaned back in her chair with a feeling of health such as she had never known before. Never in her life had she breathed in the fresh morning air outdoors under the open sky, and now the pure mountain breeze blew round her so cool and refreshing that every breath was a pleasure. And then there was the bright, sweet sunshine, which was not at all hot up here, and which lay lovely and warm on her hands and on the dry grass and the earth at her feet. Clara had never imagined that it could be like this on the mountain. "Oh, Heidi, if only I could always stay up here with you," she said, turning with delight first one way and then another in her chair, to take in the air and sunshine on every side. "Now you see, it is just as I told you," replied Heidi, much pleased, "that here at my grandfather's on the is the loveliest spot in the whole world." Just then the grandfather came out of the shed to the children. He brought 2 bowls full of foaming snow-white milk, and handed one to Clara and the other to Heidi. "This will do the little daughter good," he said, nodding to Clara. "It is from Schwanley, and will make you strong. To your good health, drink away." Clara had never tasted goat's milk before, so she had to smell of it a little first to see what it was like. But when she saw how eagerly Heidi drank down her milk without stopping once, it tasted so wonderfully good to her. Then Clara began and drank, and really it was as sweet and nourishing as if there were sugar and cinnamon in it. And Clara drank until there was nothing left in the bowl. "Ha ha! Tomorrow we will have 2, said the grandfather, who was well satisfied to see how Clara followed Heidi's example. Peter now appeared with his flock, and while Heidi was surrounded by the goats giving their morning greeting on every hand, the uncle took Peter aside, that the boy might hear what he had to say to him, for the goats kept up a great bleating, each one trying to outdo the other in expressions of delight and affection as soon as Heidi was with them. "Now listen and mind," said the uncle. "From today on, let Schwanley do as she likes. She knows where the best feed is, so if she wants to go up, follow her. It will be good for the others too, and if she wants to go higher than you usually go with her, follow on, and don't keep her back, do you hear? If you have to climb a little, it won't do you any harm. Go wherever she likes, for in this respect she has more sense than you, and she must have the very best feed, so that she will give splendid milk. Why are you looking over there as if you'd like to swallow somebody? No one is in your way. There, now, go on, and remember what I've told you." Peter was accustomed to follow the uncle's orders. He immediately started along, but it was plain to see that something disturbed him, for he kept turning his head and rolling his eyes. The goats followed and pushed Heidi along with them for a little distance. Peter approved of this. "You must come too," he called out threateningly. "You must come too, if I have to go after Schwanley." "No, I cannot," Heidi called back, and I cannot come with you for a long, long time, as long as Clara is with us. But grandfather has promised that some day we may come up together." With these words, Heidi had torn herself away from the goats and now ran back to Clara. Then Peter shook both fists so threateningly toward the wheelchair that the goats sprang to one side. But he at once sprang after them, and without stopping went on up a long distance until he was out of sight. For he thought the uncle might have seen him, and he preferred not to know what sort of impression his actions had made on the uncle. Clara and Heidi had planned so much for that day that they did not know where to begin. Heidi proposed to write a letter to the grandmamma, for the good lady, for her part, was not perfectly sure that it would please Clara up there, or indeed be good for her health, so she had made the children promise to write her a letter every day, to tell her everything that happened. In this way the grandmamma would know when she was needed on the arm, and until then could stay quietly where she was.